Hey folks, we're getting started in just a second here. Kind of just getting things set up a little bit. Still, it's been a pretty busy week for me, and I'm just kind of running everything like right at the line, so little margin. So sorry for the slightly late start today. Um, yeah, hopefully everybody's doing good. So welcome to Study Hall. As usual, this is a place for you to bring your questions. I want to keep my streams generally constrained to Python material. Um, we find that in general, people uh, in the DSI benefit from having solid Python skills. So I do want to keep things uh, focused in that way for that reason. Um, so if you have questions regarding beginner, intermediate, uh, Python topics, especially from Learn. They don't have to be from Learn. It's kind of an obvious place because I'm familiar with the material and everything, and I can help you out, and I know kind of how the form of that system works. But if you have a question from say Code Wars or somewhere else, you're welcome to bring that in, pop it into the Slack thread, and yeah, we can go from there. Cool. Let me get Slack pulled up here on my phone, and we'll get moving on. Cool. Thanks for saying hi. All right. Yeah, somebody posted an emoji in there. If you're watching and you're on the thread, go ahead and say hi or throw an emoji in the what do you call it? The thread. I was talking with somebody today, and they mentioned that they came to a study hall. They weren't quite sure where the thread was for the posting. I think I think a lot of people are assuming that they'll be able to post in the YouTube comments, and we have comments disabled. If you're watching on YouTube, you can tell we have comments disabled. So if you want to find the thread where you can ask questions, just go into our Slack Galvanize DSI Slack workspace, and there's a channel called Study Hall, and then you'll see where I post the link to Study Hall, and at the bottom it says, well, right now it says 3 replies. That number will change as we get more replies, but wherever it says the number of replies, it'll be highlighted in blue, and it'll be a link, and you can click in there and ask your questions, interact. There is a little bit of a delay, so like if you ask a question, it might be like 30 seconds before you hear me answer. So cool. All right. And it looks like we do have a question right out of the gate, or 1 or 2 at least. So let's go in here and check things out. So I have a question with number 18 on the extra list methods challenges. Can't seem to get the first value. Okay, we've got 2 questions here. I'll do this one first. This is the code. There's this, and this is the person's code. Okay. And this was question, what, 8? Is that right? 18. All right, I'm good at numbers. Number 18. So write a function. Oops. Oh, this is 15. Oh, gosh. Find shortest word amongst mixed elements. That's quite the name. Find shortest word amongst mixed elements. Okay, cool. Here we go. I'm just going to copy this in here. Okay. Let me just see. I'm gonna look through here and just see if there's anything jumps out at me. We got a good edge case here. I was talking with somebody about edge cases today. This is a really common edge case, like when you're expecting a list or a string or some collection. What if it's empty, right? It's really common to kind of have that as an edge case and just handle it separately from the rest of the logic. In general, and in this case, what we can do is, oops, sorry, we can, come on. You'll want to handle your edge cases as soon as possible. In this case, I think it wouldn't really matter, but it's sort of a best practices thing to handle them in as the very first thing, after a doc string. But this function doesn't have a doc string. But very first thing after the doc string, if their function has a doc string. But that's just kind of a matter of convention, not a big deal. I think it would work the same either way in this case. But basically, what this means is, if the length of the array is empty, then it's just going to return an empty string, and we don't have to do any other work because we already know we're going to return empty string. So sort of trivia. So let's just look at this. I'm just going to submit this code and just see what the error in learn is. We'll go from there. Okay. Interesting. Should return the shortest string in the list that appears first, where there are ties. So let's see. Does it show the input? So evidently this function is returning up, and it's expecting it to return yo. So presumably up and yo obviously are a tie for the shortest word in this case, but I glean from this error message that up appeared first, but this function returns yo. So we can look at that. So let me read through this and see if there's any wisdom that we can glean out of this, and we'll write a test and kind of go from there. Okay, so given a list, presumably of mixed elements, function returns the shortest string within the given list. If there are ties, whoops. If there are ties, it should return the first element to appear in the given list that is the shortest, expect the given list to have values other than strings if the given string list is empty. If the given list is empty, it should return an empty string. Okay, and that's that edge case. If the given list is empty, it should return an empty string. If the given list contains no strings, it should return an empty string. So this looks like a test to me. Let's make a little test here. You all know how big I am on tests. I'm going to do this. Imp equals this. Res equals this. And exp equals 2. Okay. So for those of you who don't know what I'm doing, I know I say this all the time. I worry that those of you that do know what I'm doing don't want me to hear me explain it all over again. But you know what? You're gonna, because testing is great. So I'm just writing a little test. A test is just something that just for a given input into a function, I can make an expectation of what that function should return. So I have imp, which is short for input, res, which is short for result, which is the result of my function, obviously, whatever my function returned. And then the exp is short for expectation. And that's the way you can give those names whatever you want, but I like to do imp, res, and exp because they're all the same length, and I like that. So anyways, res, oops, and then in my print, I like to do res equals exp, comma res. And that way I can see the result. Okay. I do want to do a scenario where there's a tie. So let's say, whoop, whoop, whoop. Let's do this. I'll say 2, and I'll make this one 1. So that means, okay, that's confusing. Okay, so hello and world are the same size. So, oh, and actually so is 3. Let's do 30, 33. Okay. So hello and world are the same size. So I know I want to see hello and not world. And this is a similar test to that, to the one that's failing in learn here. So I'm just going to create a similar test, and hopefully that's clear how I determined that. I'm going to look through here and just read the message where it says that it should return the shortest string in a list that appears first where there is a tie. So first where there's a tie, and then I see this. This is a little bit dense. If you don't know what that means, the minus means like take this away. The plus means it wants this instead of whatever's after the minus, right? So presumably it's saying it doesn't want to see up, which is what our function returned, but it does want to see yo, and it didn't see that. So that's basically what this minus and plus thing is saying here. So if you see something like that, you can decode that in learn. We structure a lot of our error messages that way from learn. Okay, so with this one, I expect to see hello. So let's run this, and I think I'm going to see, oh, interesting. That's very interesting. Oops. Ah, that's really interesting. So we didn't see anything for that one. Okay, so this is an interesting case. So this we have a problem here where for this particular middle case, we're not seeing anything. And then for this last one, we're seeing world, which is not what we expect. So these are slightly different inputs, but I expect hello in either case. So we'll go with this. So we've got 3 tests, and the reason I have this added this third one is because I saw some unexpected behavior. So I want to make a test that's designed to recreate that unexpected behavior, so that I can make sure it doesn't happen. Okay, cool. So I think we're good. Let's get into the problem logic here. So you got your edge case, that's great. Shortest equals array sub 0. Okay, so if I think this is meant to be array sub 0. This is a slice though. this is going to essentially copy the whole array. So if I print shortest here, you're going to see that it's actually going to be the whole array. And I'll actually do this. Array equals shortest. We'll see true or false, and we'll print array and shortest. So you can see, oh gosh, that's let me do this. Comment those out for now. So you can see true, right? And that's from this right here. So it says true that array is equal to shortest. And then we can see array and shortest just to see the proof that they are exactly the same values. So this is actually a de facto copy. I'm gleaning that the intent of this was to just get the first element, although there's a problem with doing things that way, as we just saw right there. But I imagine that this was the intent of it, was to assign it to whatever the first element is. Okay. So I'm going to assume that that was the intent, but the problem with doing assigning to the first element is actually in all my tests here, the first element is not a string at all, right? So I think what I would do, and I'm guessing here, but I'm guessing that just assigning it to an empty string is gonna help get me there. So yeah, so from here, for val in array, that's great. Do some type checking if the value is a string. In this case, it's not such a big deal, but the way this is written, this can be an and. We can do two conditions. So if the type of the val is a string and the length of the val is less than the length of shortest. Ooh, and that's a trick, right? That is a trick because it'll never be less than. Yeah, so I think what I want to do here is actually have like a first assignment to shortest condition. You know, I said that can be an and, but I'm actually going to do this. If it's less than shortest, shortest equals val. Before we even do this, I'm going to make this an elif. I'm going to do an if shortest equals an empty string. If the shortest equals an empty string, and that should be equals, not assigned. Okay, so if shortest equals an empty string, we're going to just do shortest equals val, like that. So since the consequence of these are the same, it's kind of interesting. I think I can make this an or. Right. What I had would work, but I just kind of want to make it better. So I'm going to do an or here. And now we can do that. Oh, and then now, actually now this does make sense. I'll do this, and I'll do this. And right, so now we have kind of a beast of a condition, but it should work, I think. Let's see, false. Okay, well, at least it made it through. It does not work yet, but we will see. Let's try this. That's interesting. If shortest equals empty string, or the length of the value is less than the length of shortest. Well, that's really interesting. So this did kind of fix this case because at least it's giving us world, but we actually want it to give us we actually want it to give us something else. And what I realized is actually we're just assigning whatever the last string value is. That's very interesting. So if the type of the val is a string, somehow this is becoming true in a way that I don't expect it to. So if the type of the value is a string and one of these two conditions is true. So let's see, let's just isolate this down. I'm going to do one test at a time. So we'll do this one. So if the type of the val is a string, we've got 2. Now let's just make sure we're only getting strings in here. Let's print val. So 2 and 3, okay, that's good. Those are the only 2 strings in there. So that's verified. I'll just take a note here. So we're only getting strings. And we're seeing 2 because this is true. Len val, len shortest. That's interesting. The length of the value, which is the shortest word, or which is the word, right? Okay, so if the length of the value is less than the length of the shortest. Okay. Print. Oh, well, that's interesting. Oh. Strings equals val. I'm doing strings equals val, not shortest equals val and returning shortest. I want to do that. I'll get rid of strings there. That's what. Okay. 2. Okay, there we go. That's what I wanted to see. I got thrown off because those variables looked similar. I was reading, it said strings, but I was reading, or it said, I read it as shortest, but it actually said strings. Okay, cool. So that one's working. Let's go look at our other 2 tests. Cool. Hello. Now let's do everything together. True, true, true to hello, hello. Good. So that appears to be working. Let's see what we get. Correct. Cool. So, whoops. I am wondering about this. I'll just paste in the original code. And I think there was something really similar happening here. If we get rid of strings and we're only using shortest, and then let's just start shortest at an empty string like that. So we're getting falses, we're actually not getting anything. But that's because we need to just give shortest some string, so the first string that we see. So if I wanted to do this simply, I could do the if shortest equals empty string, and do that one first, do this one second, elif. So that's how you could kind of reshape your code. And it basically turns it into my code. In other words, well, let's actually test this. Here, I'll test this solution. So that works as well. So these two solutions, this is my code. They look a little different, but they're actually logically the same. And the only difference is in this, I have that control flow, that condition condensed onto a line. And the reason for that is there are certain patterns that you'll kind of learn to recognize with control flow that you'll be able to like condense into a line. And it's generally better practice just out of a matter of convention. It's conventional to do that. So they both work, and they both actually work the same way. So I just happen to know that if you have an if and an elif, or an if and an else, or I guess really an if and an elif with the same consequent or the same conclusion. If you have an if and an else and they both contain, their conclusions are both exactly the same, the since you have these lines are just duplicated, what you're saying is you want to run this line under one of these conditions. It's sufficient that either one of these being true is sufficient to tell you that you should run this line of code, this one line of code. So that is logically identical to an or structure, right? Because I'm saying if this condition is true, I want to run that. Or if this other condition is true, I want to run that. Maybe they're both true. Actually, they both can't be true. One is true or the other is true. They both can't be true, but in this particular case, but so that's one aspect of this. The other aspect is if so if I reduce that down to this or, now I have control flow that looks like condition, and then the conclusion of this condition is another condition and nothing else, right? So that particular scenario where you have a condition whose conclusion is only another condition and nothing else, that is logically identical to an and, because essentially what I'm saying is, hey, if this condition is true, check this condition, and if that condition is true, then run the code. So in order for this code to be run, both this condition and this condition need to be true, right? You might look at this second one and say, well, that's two conditions. It's not really, it's one condition that's made out of two parts with an or in it, right? So, but since this or condition as a whole single condition and this type of string, val equals string condition, since both of those have to be true, that is an and. That's a de facto and. So we can just turn that into an and, right? So it's convention to do that where you can, and now now it literally is identical. But you can see, even though it looks a little different in this case, it actually is logically the same as writing things out this way. Now, if you wanted to write things out this way, if this is easy for you, like as a beginner, that's totally fine. I'm not going to judge you for that, but I do just want to mention it because I kind of like to talk about like not only like how to get things done, but like what you'll usually see and kind of what the Python community kind of considers normal, and um, some expectations around that. So, but yeah, I would say you're really close to a solution there. Cool. All right. That was fun. I had fun with that. Thank you for that question. And I see we have another question as well. Can't get this code to work. Please advise. Below is the error message, etc. Okay. Okay. And then we've got a link to that. It's in lesson 2. Okay. Let's find that. Skipping loops. Picky prod, that's this one. Okay. Complete the function, which takes a list of numbers and multiplies only those which are not multiplies of 3 or 7. Huh. Okay. So this function does have a docstring. I'm kind of presuming that most people know what a docstring is, but I know we have beginners on this channel a lot, especially at study halls. So, you heard me talking about like handling your edge case as the very first thing. Unless you have a docstring, then the docstring has to be the first thing. So there's no exception to that one. If your function has a docstring, it really needs to be the very first thing. It should be. Your code will work if it wasn't, but there's reasons to have your docstring very first. So obviously, not all functions have to have a docstring. We've been writing functions without a docstring, but if you have a docstring, a documentation string, it should go first. So that's what that is. So this is the problem description basically. So multiplies only numbers that are not divisible by 3 or 7. Parameters are numList, which is a list of numbers, presumably, a list of numbers to multiply. Returns a number, which is either an int or float, the product of the numbers in numList that are not multiples of 3 or 7. So I think this is my term, the rolling product. So I always call this a rolling product, and people seem to know what I mean when I say this. I'm not sure if I picked that up somewhere or if I made up that term, but it's basically another way we could look at this is the product of all the numbers in numList. So I imagine that that's where things have gone awry. I see. We have an indentation problem. So ask yourselves, given a look at this code, I think maybe perhaps somebody suggested this. Yeah, an indent. Somebody suggested that this person look at the indentation, and that's what I see. So this is in breaking and continuing, right? So let's just look at this here really quick. I'm gonna make sure this condition's good to go. So if the number mod 3, okay, wait. So if a number is divisible by 3, or if it's divisible by 7, we are not going to multiply it. Okay, num mod 3 equals 0. I think this has to be equals 0, and I think this has to be equals 7. I think. I'm honestly confused right now, but you know what? Doesn't really matter. I don't know, and I don't want to think about it, so I'm going to get Python to tell me. This is me being lazy. I genuinely don't know. I'm dyslexic, and I'm confused by this, unironically, right? And that's okay, because I don't need to I don't need to think through this. I can just get Python to print num and just see if those nums are divisible by 3 or 7. So here, of course I need an invocation to do that. I'm just going to turn this into print this, and we've got a little test, right? it's a complete test because I'm seeing the result and I'm seeing the expectation here. So that's something. So 12, 3, 6, 3, 6. Okay, so those are all divisible by 3. What about numbers divisible by 7? Do we have a 14 in here? Anything divisible by 7? I don't see anything divisible by 7. I'm going to do 14. Okay, so there's 14. 14 is in there. Okay, cool. So that tells me that indeed I want to continue. I want to run continue when the number is divisible by 3 or 7. That's all I want to do. So I'll get rid of that print. So that's how I got Python to think through that problem for me. And the reason I wanted to highlight that, and the reason I'm saying like I'm genuinely, I don't know if I need to do equals or not equals here. And I was like, I think I need to do equals instead of not equals if I want to use continue. But I'm following a hunch and I'm guessing at that. I'm not totally confident in that. And, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm not that smart or something, but, you know, the skill that I want you all to develop as programmers is not like being ultra brainiacs and being able to correctly think through every particular weird logic quirk that you see and encounter as fast as they come in. I don't have that skill. I'm sure somebody does. I don't. And I don't generally know people that do. I don't think I know anybody that really works that way. So generally the way you work is you go, I think that's the thing. And then you think, well, how would I prove that to myself? How would I check that? And then you go print num, and we'll see if I get numbers that are divisible by 3 and 7 under this condition, then I know that's the condition under which I want to continue. So I run that, that verifies my thinking. Okay, that's confirmed. Well, I might not believe my own thinking, but I do believe Python, and I am capable of thinking through some numbers being multiples of 3 or 7. I can tell if a number is multiple, small number is multiple 3 or 7. Okay, cool. So that's one thing. The other thing that I noticed, and the big thing is the location of this prod. So ask yourself, this is where I found it. I know I just kind of moved it around a little bit, but this is the indentation level that I found it at. So ask yourselves, how many times will this line be run? How many times will that line be run? And how many times, how many times will it be run in this code exactly as it stands? And how many times should it be run? And I see somebody's asking me to go over another lesson. I'd be happy to, would you send me a link to it? And it's much quicker for me to just copy paste a link and than it is for me to like navigate through it and learn, because sometimes we cover material multiple times, so I might go to the wrong place, and it also just takes me like a couple minutes. So if you post in a link, I will be happy to take your question after this. Cool. So if you're looking at this code and you're thinking how many times this will run, right? You might think, oh, well, it'll run as many times as the for loop goes through, right? And that might be what you want to have happen. And in fact, that is what should happen. That's what we need to have happen in order to solve this problem correctly. However, that isn't what is going to happen the way this code is written. And that's because this line, prod times gets num, is not inside this for loop. And it's not inside because it's not indented, right? Python knows that this for loop is over as soon as it sees code that is unindented from the indentation level of the body of the loop, right? That's where this if is. So we've got to indent this into the loop. So if we do that, as soon as I do that, you can see I get the correct result. Now this lesson, let me just submit this, prove it. We'll see. That's correct. Okay. So this lesson, this is on skipping loops, which I know is going to be all about the continue keyword. If you're looking at this and you're not at this lesson yet, or you're like, what is continue? you know, like you don't necessarily need to know all this right now. Continue that is a keyword that bears on loops. It is only valid when it is indented, somehow indented in a loop. It can be a for loop or a while loop, either one, but it only bears on loops. So if I have a continue or a break, actually break does something similar to continue. If I have those outside of a loop, Python will yell at me. Let's see, syntax error, continue not properly in loop. Break, it's going to be the same thing. Break outside loop. Well, it's funny that it's worded differently, but yeah, it's still telling me the same thing. We can't have a continue or a break outside of a loop because this just gives us kind of a little bit finer control over our looping processes. So what continue does, it might, based on the name, you might think it does like it can just continues. I don't know. I think it's kind of it's an odd name, but if it helps, you can read continue as skip. And I think skip, I think if I were writing a language and I had the opportunity to name continue from scratch, I probably would have called it skip. I might call it like skip iteration. That's what it should be called. Because that's what it does. It skips the one iteration that you're on and continues to the next one. That's all it does. So given that we're checking this condition, if a number is divisible by 3 or 7, then we continue. I could, and perhaps this is what the original poster was wondering about, you know, with this not equal, I could check the opposite conditions and then just do this under that condition. If I were actually writing this out and I weren't doing it in a way that I was just trying to use continue because this lesson is about continue, then I would do it this way. So let's do it. Let's just try it that way. This might actually yell at me because I'm not sure if we change things to require, it might need to see that continue keyword in there. Aha, probably does. Oh. Sorry, and I have to change that or to an and. Okay, so this just works this way. So this doesn't use continue, but it is actually, I think, slightly more conventional in this case. So it's kind of funny, this problem doesn't actually require continue to solve it. A lot of problems where you actually use continue don't require it, but it's like using it makes it easier to think about in some way, you know. And that's fine. I mean, it's fine to just write a solution in a way that is easy to think about, and maybe it's a line or two longer than it absolutely needs to be or could be, but if it's easy to think about, then that's pretty valuable. If it's easy to think about, if it has a low cognitive load, it's easy to maintain and it's easy to share. And those are very beneficial aspects of code. I've heard it said that there are two audiences for code. One is the computer, and the other is you. The other is other people, programmers, right? So we're a primary audience for the code. You know, we're the ones reading the code as well as the machine. So you don't want to just write your code in a way that's like best for the machine. You want to write it in a way that's also good for you. And you want to find a balance. Okay, cool. I digress. And I've broken everything. And okay, there we go. Okay, we've got another question. Challenge 3 of join split. Okay. At this link. Write a function called CSV square CSV. I'm just going to do this. Oops. Those look like tests to me. I'll keep those. Notes. Okay. I'm just going to quickly stub this out. I'm taking in CSV, and I'll just pass for now. Do this. Do my res and exp. Oh my gosh. All right. False and none. That's what I expect. This is just a test of my tests. I've got 2 tests. I'm ready to go. Write a function called CSV square CSV, which should take number data in the CSV format, square the numbers, and return the squared numbers in the original CSV format. The CSV may also contain new line characters \n, which should be preserved. Any float object should be rounded to 2 decimal places. Okay. So this is a fun one. I really like string processing stuff. I don't know why. I feel embarrassed. I feel like I'm admitting something, like when I say that, like I like string processing. I don't know why I feel embarrassed to say that, but I find these fun. So let's kind of take there was no code provided with this one. So, I mean, feel free to share, the person asking, share your code if you want me to like go through it and debug it and kind of talk about, like, what I think is going on or how to improve it. If you don't want to do that, that's fine too. No big deal. Since I don't see code, I'm just assuming to give a solution for this. Cool. All right. So let's see. For this one, I think we're just going to create an accumulator. And I'm probably going to do a list. List accumulation is pretty versatile and easy because I do it a lot. And then I think we're probably going to end up joining that list again back. But yeah, let's just dive into this and go from there. So with this one, there's kind of an interesting trick to this, but I'm trying to think of a way to present it as if you were discovering it rather than just me just throwing out a solution. So let's just approach this from solving one test at a time. Excuse me. So we're supposed to go through this string and produce a string that squares all of the numbers. So one thing I could do is I could say for element in CSV. Is this supposed to be called anything in string? I'll just call it CSV. So for element in CSV, if element is not, we'll say not equal to a comma, then oh shoot, we could follow in course with the last one. If it is a comma, I'll continue. Since the last question was about continue, we'll use a continue there, which will just skip that loop. Otherwise, we could do an else here, but I'm just gonna, since we have a continue, it's already kind of making the code below exclusive. So otherwise, we will CSV list dot append int L squared, and let's return CSV list. So I know there's a few steps I'm missing, but I want to check on my CSV list, and I'm going to return some version of this anyways, right? So this is not quite there yet, but notice my expectation as a string with the characters, with the number characters, numbers as strings, 1, 4, 9, and 16. And now I have a list with the integers 1, 4, 9, and 16. I do want to make sure that these are characters, so I actually want to cast this whole thing as a string, like that. So now I have a list of those strings, and all I got to do is join. String.join. Okay. Oh, wanted to join on commas. Good. So that'll work for this. So you see we get a true, and that works for this. But, dun dun dun, this one gives me an error and everything. Okay, fine. We'll do it that way. Let's see here. I'm trying to take this very step by step. Okay. So invalid literal for int with base 10, comma. I don't think I'm passing a comma there. Thank you very much. If int, oops, if L, I think that's what I meant to do. Ah, interesting. Very, very, very interesting. So we have to determine if a number is a float as well. Yep. So this has several several problems, and I forgot about that second one, which is that these we have dots in here, so we have these floating point values that we need to preserve. So, okay, I was kind of trying to go through this and show you like, well, if you had this, then you could turn it into that, and you could turn it into that. But I'm gonna kind of skip ahead a little bit in that process. There's sort of a different way to think about this problem, especially with this kind of string, right? So one thing that would really help is to split, is to use split. And dot split. So we can split this, and I'm actually going to show the split on this first one. Oops. We want to split on commas for this first one, right? So this will work for the first one, and we don't need any control flow. This is just for element and csv.split on commas. If you're curious about what this does, let's just look at that really quick. So that splits the string into a list of elements, and notice it divided the elements based on where the commas were, because I wanted to split on commas. So if I try to do that here, I get some different problems, right? So it tries to convert this string into an integer, and notice it's 13.0 \n7, and that's not an integer. For one thing, 13.0, well, that could be cast as an integer, but \n is a new line character, so that's not a numeric character. So we need a way to handle that. So essentially, comma separated values, CSV, is also separated by new lines. At least it is in this example. There are different CSV standards. CSV is a little bit of a loose definition, but so it's also new line separated values. So unfortunately, I can't split on two things with split, but what I can do is realize that a new line, well, it's a new line. So what I could re-engineer this a little bit. I could say for line, because every section separated by a new line is a different line, right? I could say for line in CSV split on new line, and let's just print out and see what line is. So there's one line 1513. If I look here, 1513, that's my input, and then 7 to 11.1, 7 to 11.1. So those are the two different lines. And then in here, I could do for num, I was calling it L before, EL, for num in line dot split, and then I'll split on commas again. So let's print num. All right, so 1, 5, 13, 7 to 11.1. 1, 5, 13, 7 to 11.1. Great. So now all I have to do, well, I have two things to do. I have to be able to recover the new lines accurately, and I have to be able to square the numbers if they're floats, right? If they're floating point values, I need to retain that information. So let's handle that float thing first. I'm just going to say if the way I can tell, so these are strings of numbers, remember? So if I turn a number that's an integer into a string and a number that's a float into a string, these are strings. How can I tell if one's a float and one's an integer? I'll let you think about that for a second. So you can tell if you, because there's a dot and there's a period character in a float. So I could say if dot in num, I could say we want to append a float, and if it's if there's no dot, then we want to append an integer. I'm just going to take notes here, just like this. That for now. Okay. I need a place to append that though. So what I can do, I'm going to say CSV line, equals a list. So essentially, this is a nested accumulator pattern, right? I have another accumulator that I'm going to accumulate into. And this is actually what I'm going to do the accumulating on, is CSV line. You'll see why in a second here. So I wanted to do this one for int, change that to num. And we'll just do the same thing for float. We'll just make it a float. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's try that. Then at the end of this, I didn't alter CSV list at all. At the end of this, what I want to do is actually CSV list dot append join CSV line. So I'm appending the join on new lines. Nope, excuse me. I'm appending this on commas. Yeah, I'm appending that on commas. And then I'm appending this with a new line, or returning that with a new line there. And you can see in my test I get true, right? So let's just walk through this a little bit. I've got my result list, which is I'm just calling CSV list. Let's see all the places that I use that. I use that in two other places. And then we have this nested loop. And you might think, oh, well, it's a nested loop, so it's not that efficient. But the way this particular nested loop is structured, it just gives us, there is a way to do this with only one loop, but it doesn't actually increase or decrease the number of iterations. So we're not actually doing redundant iterations. The reason is we break up, we need to look at, what we need to do is, and what we can't get away from is looking at each one of these numbers individually, right? So we need as many loops as there are numbers to be squared and appended into the results. So we need at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 iterations through the loops. And that's actually what we're getting from this nested loop, even though it might not appear that way at first. The reason for that is this first loop breaks on new lines. And the second loop breaks on, or splits on, commas, right? You might think, well, like what if there are no new lines? Is it going to break in that case? And it won't. It's just going to give us one thing back, and this outer for loop is basically not there at all. And then what happens is we have this inner for loop that runs once, this inner accumulator. And it's basically, we do as many loops as there are for this, So what this does, this breaks on new lines, and in the second test case, it gives us 2 lines. And then we break on commas, which gives us 1, 2, 3 in the first line and 4, 5, 6 in the second line. So we end up doing 6 passes ultimately. Yeah. And then this, if the dot is in the number, then we know it's a float, and we do float logic. If it's not, then we do that logic. Then at the end, once this loop is complete, what we did with CSV line is we constructed one line, and then we join that line on commas. Since it's a line, each line has to be separated by commas. We join that line on commas, and we append that comma joined line into CSV list. We go through we do that for as many lines as there are in the input, appending the comma joined lists. And then at the very end, we have a list of comma joined strings. of CSV strings, and I'll prove that. I'll prove that right here. Print CSV list. So there's our list of CSV strings, and we know that every string in there originally should have been separated by a new line. So when we return, we just do new line dot join CSV, and that puts in the new lines between all the strings and gives us a string back with new lines where the elements in the lists were broken up by. So that's how that works. Cool. Let's prove this works. You can see I have a few other solutions to this. Oh, I think this was from, okay, wow, that didn't even work. Okay, let's see why that didn't even work. So these are working. Let's see here. Should handle multi-line CSV, interesting. Okay, maybe, here we go. Any float object should be rounded to decimal places. I should, I think round, we want to round that to 2. I use round so seldom. I have to refresh my mind on how round works. Oops. Let's say round 3.1234522. Okay, oh, that is how it works. I remembered. Okay. Let's try that. Okay, that's all the problem was. I just forgot to round. Oh, I gotta read all the text in the problem statement. Okay, so yeah, that's that. Hopefully that's clear. Let me know if you have any further questions or if that was a terrible explanation or whatever. Cool. I don't see any other questions posted in at the moment. I'll go on mute for a minute. I'll just put a minute or 2 on the clock and wait to see if we get any other questions. If you have any Python questions, feel free to just pop them in. I'll just give you all a minute. Hey folks, sorry about that. My housemate dropped off their dog with me. I got a friend now. They leave the house, so um, when they leave the house, this dog gets nervous and just needs somebody. So, anyways, it worked out perfectly. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions. That's okay. We've got a bit of time left. We've got a little more than 15 minutes left, so I'm thinking we can just go through. Oh, I had some stuff I wanted to go through with variable scope. We didn't really get through this last time, which is okay. Let's talk about variable scope. So I gave some examples. I don't remember exactly all of what I went through last time, but if I covered some material twice with this, I think that's fine. I went through some examples of some problems, some issues that you can encounter with using global variables inside your function. I'll tell you what I mean by that. You have variables. It's okay to write a function that takes in an argument, and then you have a global variable, and you pass that variable as an argument into the function. That's totally fine. When I say there's problems with using a global variable in your function, what I mean is using it without passing it as an argument, like just using it out of the blue. I'll show you why. Let's say I'll make a function def add 4, call it add 4. We'll take in, and I mean, you can probably tell what it's going to do. It's going to add 4 to n. So I'll say return n plus 4. Excuse me, x. We'll do n plus x, right? Because x is equal to 4. Now, obviously, I could do n plus 4 in this tiny little example, but I'm just going to say, we have some global variable, and we're just going to write this function in a way that it's dependent on it, right? So if I print add 4 to 9, we're going to get 13. Okay, that's as expected. So my function appears to work as expected. Everything seems fine. And then let's say 100 or 2 lines later, or in a different document, I decide, hey, why don't I use x for something? Because that's a variable name. And I'll say x equals 77. Well, what happens now when I call add 4 to 3? What is this going to give me? It's going to give me 80, right? So changing this variable will have the effect of seemingly, inexplicably, randomly changing how this function works. So there's just a variable floating around somewhere that has full agency over how or if my function works at all. And, this could be, let's say, I define this in one place, and then, later on in my project, I call my function here, let's say on, in main, or we'll say in a file called lib.py, line 67. And then this is the same document. We'll say that this line, here, why don't we do this? We're just pretending. This is on line 202, and this is on line 781. Right, so these are all spaced out with a lot of code in between them. And when I go on line 781 to use my function, it just doesn't work the same. It doesn't add 4 anymore. Right, now this, I'm using intentionally a small example. As you're looking at this, I'm sure you could think of lots of ways to fix this. You know, obviously, like I said initially, like just add 4. But you know, if let's say this is you know, library code that you imported, or you wrote a library that's a few thousand lines long, and you've got code like this in there, it can be really hard to just find the definition where the thing went wrong and just fix it really trivially quickly. So you want to avoid this pattern from the moment of design. That way you don't end up here, right? So this is one scenario where add 4 no longer does what it says it does. It does not add 4 to its input. There's another scenario where what if instead of reassigning it to a number, x is just like a string? Well, now this is going to try to add n to a string, and even worse, it's going to give me an error, right? So changing this breaks my function forever after I've changed it. Wherever I changed it, every single call to that function after this line has been run is broken forever, unless I go fix the code or didn't design it that way in the first place. So you might look at this and you say, oh, well, okay, well, it's something that I'll have to avoid. And you might have the thought like, well, I guess I should remember it because it also seems powerful. Like, you know, you can have variables that sort of change how your function works. Maybe you could kind of set configuration information in those variables. It's fine to have a function with like configuration information as defaulted parameters, but not as variables. There's never a scenario, I've never encountered a single problem where I've had to do this. And I can say with reasonable certainty that no such problem exists. This isn't actually a necessary pattern. There's a reason it exists, and it's kind of a holdover from other features in Python, but it doesn't actually need to exist. So you might think, well, since Python allows me to do this thing, there must be a use case for it somewhere, but there isn't. Just don't do it. Just if you have a global variable and you want it inside your function, there is a way to get it in there, which is to pass it in as an argument. So if I rewrite this to add 4, right, and I can call my function like this. Oops, pokey. The dog is laying her head on the on my keyboard. Sweetie. Sorry. Okay. So in this case, this is totally valid, right? Because we can add x in as an argument and it's totally fine. Now it's still possible that I could pass in a bad argument, but that just breaks one function call. It didn't like permanently alter and taint this function forever. It just means that I misused it once, you know? So you can still, you know, mess up. You can still get an error if you pass in an argument that won't work for that function, but it's not going to ruin your code. So that's something that you want to avoid. So this is an issue of variable scope, and I'm kind of using some terms here, right? Global variable. If I really wanted to use this, I could make it a local variable. If I really wanted to had to like have n plus x, whatever, I can make it a local variable, and this is just fine as well. So yeah, no issues here. Of course, now the name of this doesn't matter. I mean, you know, it could be called x and or z or poodle, whatever. So the variables that are tabbed outside of the function, all the way to the left, that are not inside the function, are global variables, meaning they're accessible globally any place after they're defined. The any variable created inside the function is local to the function, so we call it a local variable. Yeah, that's basically the idea. The big takeaway here is just, if you have variables inside your function, if you're using variables inside your function, they should either be local to that function, or you should be using the parameters in that function. If you have a global variable that you want to use with a function, that's fine. Just pass it in as an argument. That's the only acceptable way for it to find its way into your function, is to pass it in as an argument. If you think, well, my function only takes 2 arguments and I've got a global variable and, you know, I've got this other thing I need to add to it, well, perhaps you need to rewrite your function so that it takes 3 arguments, or perhaps you need to write a different function or something, you know. So there's a few things that you could do with that. Cool. That feels like a pretty good spiel, and I'm pretty happy with that. Hopefully that's clear for you all. I feel a little better about that than last time. Last time I went over this, I felt like I didn't really explain it as thoroughly as I wanted to, but that feel like I covered the bases with that. So cool. Great. We've got 5 minutes left till our usual break time. So this is a good place to wrap up, I think. Thanks for the questions today. I appreciate the interaction and the questions. Yeah, I think that's what really makes study halls come alive. I had a lot of fun. Hope you did too. Look forward to seeing you next time. This Friday, Tovio will be leading study hall. I think we've arrived at a schedule of that I'm gonna do Monday and Wednesday study halls, and Tovio will do Fridays. A quick note on study halls. Since this is study halls are like an adjunct thing that we do in addition to our other job duties, interviewing, teaching, premium prep, mentoring, doing one-on-one students. So we have kind of central job duties, and then study halls are just kind of a free adjunct to that. So there are times if I get really busy in a day and I need to schedule a meeting, there are times when Tobio and I will cancel study halls. Although you know, we try to make them go on. We try to show up and have them go on every time. But just so you know, there's that possibility that we'll get busy and we'll need to cancel. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Since study halls are free and just on YouTube, um, there's and since you can DM us anytime, and you can arrange one-on-one mentoring and various other things. Like we have a lot of avenues to support students as well. So um, yeah, I just wanted to mention that and throw that out there just so people know. Cool. All right. Well, It was fun. And I'll see you Monday for study hall. If you're in premium prep, I'll see you tonight for class. Great. Have a good one. Bye-bye.